Hello everyone and welcome to Mitchmatics. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to add integers with the absolute value method, or at least I like to call it that. But basically you're just using absolute values to help you reason through solving, or in this case adding integers. And some people call this the rote memorization because you just remember the order of steps, but this does help you understand a little bit. So again, what integers are just positive and negative numbers. So for example, positive 3 would be one example of an integer, negative 2 would be another, and let's see, negative 100. Maybe a positive 301. Any number that has a sign next to it is an integer. Most commonly, though, we do not show the positive sign in numbers, so if you see 301 by itself without a positive, just assume it is a positive number, okay? So I'm going to quickly erase those. So that's what integers are. So now I'm going to show you how to think of integers using the absolute value method. So first off, what is an absolute value? So what an absolute value is, it's the distance on the number line from 0. And you can go in either direction. So if I look at my number line and I have 0, I have negative 1, negative 2 this way, I have a 1, 2, a 3, I'll add a negative 3. So if I take an absolute value of any number, I basically am just taking the distance. And let me show you. So let's say I wanted to take the absolute value of negative 3. I'm going to do it in blue. The absolute value symbol is represented by 2 bars, and you just put the number inside of it. So negative 3. Now, that's just the distance from 0. So all I need to do is count to 0 and see how far my distance is. It's 1, 2, 3. So my answer will be 3. So you don't actually need to use the number line. Just remember it's the distance. You just take away the sign when you do the absolute value. Let me do it one more example. Let's say instead I wanted the absolute value of positive 2. So if I do positive 2's absolute value, I'm just going to count to 0. 1, 2. So in this case, 2 will be my absolute value. So this is how you find your absolute value. So how to say that, again, is absolute value. And it's always represented by the 2 little lines that go up and down, the vertical lines. All right. So I'm going to open a new tab and we're going to talk about how to use that to solve integers. So there's a few ways to think of integers. You can think of adding integers with the same sign, and you can think of integers adding with different signs. And there are going to be 2 different ways to think about this. Think about it. So make sure you know the distinction. So the first one we're going to do is the same sign. So when you do the same sign of addition of integers, you just have to remember that you're going to be taking the absolute value of both of those signs, and you're going to be basically adding them. So, for example, let's do a problem, 3 plus 2. We all know 3 plus 2 is equal to 5, but let's do it with the absolute value. So if I take the absolute value of 3, and I take the absolute value of 2, those both will be 3, 2, and again it's 5. So it seems pretty straightforward, but let's now do it with negatives. So again, same signs. I'm going to add now 2 negatives. So I'm going to do blue. So let's say I do negative 3 plus negative 7. So I'm going to take the absolute values. I'm going to take the absolute value of negative 3, which I know to be positive 3. Not positive 3. Don't think of it as a positive. Think of it as a distance. But I guess you can think of it that way too. And negative 7. Absolute value of negative 7 is 7. Now, I'm just going to add them because I'm adding them together. So I know 3 plus 7 will equal 10. So I could just have done it down here. 3 plus 7 equals 10. Now, remember, this is not my answer. So I took the absolute value of both of my integers, and I have 10. But you have to remember, the sign of both of those integers will be the sign of the answer. So because these are both negative, this absolutely has to be a negative number. So this will be a negative 10. So this would be your final answer. That's how you do same signs and how to think of it. Another way to think of it is if I add 2 positive numbers, I should have a positive number. If I add two negative numbers, I should have a negative number. So that's the situation again that we just went over. Now, the last part is how do I do add? So add with different signs. How do I add integers with different signs? So it doesn't matter which integers first. You can have a negative first or you can have a positive first. So if I had, in this case, negative 3 plus 2, the way you think of this with absolute value, you take, let's see, let me make sure. So you're going to subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater absolute value. So you think of it as subtraction. Even though it's addition, you have to think of it as subtraction. So let me first take my absolute value. So I'll take absolute value of negative 3, which is equal to 3. and then I'll take absolute value of 2, which is equal to 2. Now, I'm just going to take the number which is higher in value and subtract it. So in this case, I'm going to take 3 and subtract 2 from there. So I'm going to say 3 minus 2 will equal 1. So that I know that will be my number for my answer, but I don't know that's going to be my sign. So the key thing you have to remember about when you're doing different signs, you need to make sure that the sign of the answer is the same as the one with the higher number or the higher absolute value. So if you look here, -3 was the higher absolute value. If you look again here, the -3, 3 is a higher number than 2. So because it's a -3, my answer has to be negative. The way you can think of it otherwise is just think, I have a -3 and a 2. I just can think of that subtraction. So the difference between 3 and 2 is 1. And then I just remember again that it's 3 that's bigger and it's negative. So the negative will be my answer, so -1. Let me show you one more example. This one's a little longer, but that's okay. So let me say instead I started with a 6 and I added a -5. So it's the same exact thing. I'm going to take the absolute value of 6, and that's going to be 6. I'm going to take the absolute value of -5. Again, this is the distance on the number line. And so that just means it's +5. Now I'm going to subtract them. So I'm going to subtract 6 minus 5. So remember, my lower number will be subtracted from my higher number. So 6 minus 5 will be 1. So I absolutely know that my number is 1. Now I just have to double check. Which number is the higher value? If I look at 6 and 5, I know 6 is a higher number. Now, remember there's no sign in front of 6, but there is a positive right here. So because that's a +6 and it's higher than the -5, I know my answer has to be +1. I could write a little positive, or I don't have to. So it just depends on what you want to do. That is how you add integers with the absolute value method. So I hope that helped you out. Have a great day.